Today, we're not just exploring a claim, we're looking into something much deeper: identity, truth, and the emotional needs that can shape what we believe. When someone says they believe a famous person is their parent, it's not always about fact. More often, it's about what that figure represents to them: security, power, importance, or even salvation from a painful life. In this situation, we're dealing with a young woman who isn't just making a statement, she's expressing a profound longing. The need for connection is one of the most natural human instincts. When someone grows up without stable family ties or without feeling truly seen and supported, it's not surprising they might seek that connection in symbolic or extraordinary ways. Believing that a larger than life figure is her father could be her mind's way of trying to fill a very real emotional void. It's not just a lie, it's a coping mechanism, but even the most comforting illusions don't lead to healing. They distract from it. There's a crucial difference between what we feel and what's real. Feelings are powerful, and they can create stories in our minds that seem unshakable, but we can't let emotion be the judge and jury of truth. Facts are neutral. They don't bend for what we want, and that's not cold, it's freeing. Because the moment we ground ourselves in what is real, we give ourselves the chance to grow from solid ground, instead of sinking further into fantasy. Identity is never something we find by assigning ourselves to someone else's story. It's something we uncover by looking inward, asking hard questions, and facing truths that may not be easy to accept. Sometimes the person we most want to belong to isn't capable of giving us what we need or may not even know we exist. That doesn't make us any less whole. Who you are is not defined by DNA. It's defined by the choices you make and the healing you're willing to pursue. Holding on to a false story delays that healing. If we keep feeding a version of our life that isn't grounded in reality, we stay stuck. And stuck people can't build futures, they can only repeat the past. It's painful to let go of a dream, especially when it's helped you get through hard times. But if that dream is rooted in fantasy, it's going to turn into a trap. At some point, the story starts to hurt more than it helps. Letting go of that story isn't about giving up. It's about making space for the truth to come in and do its work. Real healing begins when we stop running from the facts and start facing them. That means asking the right questions, not, "Why won't he claim me?" but "What am I really looking for?" Often, it's not a person we're missing, it's a sense of safety, of belonging, of mattering. And those things can be built, even if the person we once hoped would provide them never does. You don't have to be the child of someone famous to be worthy. You don't need a famous name to matter. You have value right now as you are without needing to attach yourself to a fantasy. The journey to healing might start with heartbreak, but it ends with freedom. And freedom is what gives us the power to write our own story, not borrow someone else's. So let's start writing that story today, one built on truth, self, worth, and hope that doesn't require pretending. The yearning for connection is one of the most deeply rooted human emotions. From the moment we're born, we seek out attachment from parents, family, and community. When those bonds are broken or never formed in a healthy way, the ache they leave behind doesn't just disappear. It stays with us, and we often try to fill that space, sometimes with fantasy. Believing a public figure or well-known personality is your parent may seem outrageous to outsiders, but to the person holding that belief, it can feel like the answer to a silent question that's lived in them for years: where do I belong? When someone grows up with emotional distance, abandonment, or instability, it's natural for them to start looking outward for something that makes them feel special, important, or grounded. The idea that their real father might be someone powerful, famous, or successful becomes more than just a dream. It becomes a solution to everything they feel they're missing. That kind of belief isn't usually born from deceit, it's born from pain. It's a protective story the mind tells to try to make sense of the emptiness, and that story can feel safer than the unknown truth. But emotion alone is not proof. Just because something feels true doesn't make it fact. Feelings are intense and they influence perception, but facts are what hold up under examination. They don't change because we want them to. That's why it's so important to separate what we feel from what is verifiably real. If we live by emotion alone, we risk building a life on illusion, and that kind of foundation will eventually crumble. Facing facts isn't about being cold or cruel, it's about choosing healing over denial. It's essential to understand that identity isn't something we inherit from others. It's something we create and discover within ourselves. Trying to link who we are to someone else, especially someone who represents everything we think we lack, can keep us from forming our own sense of self. We are not made whole by a name, a reputation, or a family tree. We are made whole by self-awareness, resilience, and truth. No one outside of us can give us lasting worth. That's something we must claim for ourselves. When we hold on too tightly to a false story, we delay our own healing. A belief based on fantasy may bring comfort at first, but over time it becomes a prison. It keeps us from moving forward, from building healthy relationships, and from truly understanding ourselves. Letting go of a story that once gave us hope can be painful, but it's also liberating. There's power in telling the truth not just to others, but to ourselves. And that power is what allows us to step out of the past and into our future. The moment we begin to question the narrative and ask what we're really looking for, we start the journey toward clarity. Often, it isn't the person we're missing, it's the feeling of being loved, accepted, and safe. These are not things that can be permanently borrowed from a fantasy. They are things we can build step by step through real relationships, through personal growth, and through acceptance of our own story, no matter how imperfect it may be. No one needs to be the child of someone admired or famous to be valuable. You matter because of who you are, not because of who you wish your parent was. Healing doesn't come from pretending. It comes from standing in the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. There is so much strength in that. So if you've been chasing an identity based on someone else's shadow, maybe it's time to turn on the light and find your own reflection. It's there, and it's worth discovering. There is often a fine line between imagination and belief, especially when that belief serves a deep emotional purpose. When someone holds on to the idea that a public figure is their parent, it's rarely just about fame or attention. More often, it's about clinging to something that offers a sense of meaning, identity, or rescue from personal struggles. In those cases, fantasy becomes more than daydreaming. It becomes a shield against pain. And while that shield may feel like protection, it also blocks the truth from getting through. The mind is powerful, especially when it's trying to protect the heart. If someone feels lost or disconnected from their family or sense of self, the brain may create a narrative that explains those feelings in a way that seems comforting. It becomes easier to believe that a hidden truth is out there waiting to be revealed, rather than accepting that the truth may be simpler, more painful, or just unresolved. This is where fantasy begins to cross into belief, and belief begins to override logic. But the truth is, belief without evidence can lead us far from reality. Feelings are real in the sense that we experience them strongly, but they are not proof of fact. We can feel something intensely and still be wrong about it. We can want something with every part of ourselves and still have no evidence to support it. That's why it's so important to separate emotion from truth, especially when the consequences of holding onto a false belief are significant. Evidence matters because it grounds us. It gives us a way to test our thoughts and ideas against the world outside our own mind. When we rely solely on feeling, we risk becoming trapped in a loop of self-confirmation where we ignore anything that doesn't fit our story. That kind of thinking can be dangerous, not just because it can be wrong, but because it keeps us from growing. Growth comes when we're brave enough to challenge our own assumptions. Letting go of fantasy doesn't mean dismissing your pain or pretending your needs aren't real. In fact, it's the opposite. When you move past fantasy, you finally make room for real healing to begin. You stop trying to force life to fit a script and instead start responding to what's actually in front of you. That shift is where personal power is found. It's where you begin to live your life with clarity instead of confusion. The transition from fantasy to evidence is not easy. It means confronting disappointment, uncertainty, and sometimes heartbreak. But it also means giving yourself the opportunity to discover truth, not the convenient kind, but the kind that can stand up to scrutiny. And in that truth, you might find something even more meaningful than what the fantasy promised: understanding, self-respect, and the ability to choose your path with open eyes. You are not your fantasies, and you are not your doubts either. You are the person who has the power to ask questions, to look for answers, and to face reality with strength. And when you choose to live based on evidence rather than emotion alone, you give yourself the gift of true direction. The world becomes less about what you wish were true and more about what you can build with what is true. That is where real freedom lies. Identity is not something that is handed to us, and it isn't something we can simply borrow from someone else. It's something that we uncover gradually through self-discovery, experience, and truth. Too often, people try to attach themselves to someone else's story in hopes that it will define their own. But real identity doesn't come from names, fame, or the illusion of connection. It comes from doing the hard, often uncomfortable work of figuring out who we are when all the noise is stripped away. The temptation to believe you are connected to someone powerful or well-known can feel overwhelming when your sense of self feels unstable or uncertain. It's natural to want to be part of something bigger, to belong to a story that feels meaningful or extraordinary. But when identity is built on a fantasy or assumption, it becomes fragile. It may provide comfort in the short term, but it cannot support real growth or lasting peace. The foundation will always crack under the weight of truth. It's important to understand that real identity isn't glamorous. It's not about what other people see or admire. It's about how you see yourself when you're alone, when you're honest, and when no one's watching. That kind of identity doesn't require someone else's approval or connection. It comes from reflection, honesty, and the courage to be your own person, even when it's lonely or difficult. When we stop trying to attach our identity to someone else's image, we start the real process of becoming whole. Attaching yourself to the identity of someone else can feel like a shortcut to significance. If you feel invisible or unimportant, the idea that you are secretly tied to someone admired or respected might seem like a fix. But what's really happening in that moment is an avoidance of the real internal work. You can't shortcut self-worth. You can't outsource the building of your identity. It has to come from within, step by step, choice by choice, truth by truth. Identity built on truth is strong and lasting. It allows you to face yourself honestly, to admit your fears and your hopes without needing to wrap them in fantasy. It gives you the freedom to take ownership of your life, your direction, and your values. There is power in not needing to be someone else's anything. There is strength in claiming your name, your past, and your story, even when they're messy, painful, or incomplete. When you chase identity through someone else's image, you often lose sight of the parts of yourself that are already valuable. You forget the resilience that got you through hard times. You overlook the kindness, the creativity, the strength that's uniquely yours. These parts of you may not seem grand or dramatic, but they are the truest building blocks of identity. They are what make you you, and they deserve to be honored. So if you've been searching for your place in someone else's story, it might be time to step out of their shadow and into your own light. You don't need a famous father, a dramatic origin, or a borrowed narrative to be worthy. You are worthy right now, just as you are. Identity is not assigned. It is built through truth, through reflection, and through the quiet bravery of choosing to be real instead of reaching for a lie. That's where your true story begins, but because it feels safe, it gives us comfort, it fills in the blanks, and it offers an explanation when life feels too uncertain or painful. But even when a belief feels protective, if it's not based in reality, it eventually does more harm than good. The truth might not always be what we want, but it is always what we need if we want to grow. It's natural to fear that the truth will bring disappointment, especially if it means letting go of a dream or admitting that something we've believed is not real. That fear can be paralyzing. It can cause us to resist evidence, to push back against facts, and to double down on a story that no longer serves us. But fear of the truth doesn't make it disappear. The more we resist it, the more it quietly shapes our lives in ways we don't understand. And that's where confusion and emotional pain tend to grow. Accepting the truth requires courage because it demands that we look at things as they are, not as we wish they were. It's not about being hard on ourselves or stripping away hope. It's about choosing clarity over illusion. It's about understanding that healing starts with honesty, even when that honesty leaves us feeling exposed or vulnerable. We cannot truly move forward if part of us is still stuck in a version of the past that isn't real. The truth has a way of clearing the fog. It brings with it a kind of relief, even if it also brings sadness or grief. Because once we stop pretending, we stop wasting energy trying to hold together a story that doesn't fit. We stop spinning our wheels and begin to plant our feet on solid ground. And while that ground might feel unfamiliar at first, it is also stable. It's something we can actually build on, something that can support the weight of a real future. Letting go of a false belief doesn't mean giving up. It means making room for something better. It opens the door to healing relationships, understanding our past, and learning how to move forward with a clearer sense of self. The truth allows us to stop searching for validation in the wrong places and to start investing in what's real, and that shift can be one of the most powerful changes we ever make in our lives. There is a kind of strength that comes from standing in the truth. It doesn't mean we don't feel pain. It means we face it. It means we stop hiding behind fantasy and start walking through reality with our eyes open. And in doing so, we discover we are stronger than we thought. We learn that we can survive heartbreak, we can accept what is, and we can still create a meaningful life from it. The truth may hurt, but that pain is part of the healing process. It's not there to break us down, but to break us open, to help us release what's false so we can find what's real. Truth gives us a foundation, it gives us perspective, and most of all, it gives us freedom. And once we find the courage to face it, we discover that it doesn't just hurt. It also heals. You're not broken, you're searching. And that search is not something to be ashamed of. It's human. When the world feels uncertain or our lives feel incomplete, we begin to reach outward, hoping to find something or someone that will make us feel whole. Sometimes in that search we cling to ideas that aren't based in truth but in longing. It's not about being dishonest or delusional. It's about trying to make sense of something that hasn't felt right for a long time and using hope as a placeholder where clarity hasn't yet come. Many people carry invisible wounds, abandonment, rejection, not knowing where they come from or why things happened the way they did. And when you don't have solid answers, the mind starts to fill in the blanks. It's a survival mechanism. You begin to create stories that feel better than the silence. You start to believe those stories because they make the pain feel lighter, or because they finally give your suffering a purpose. That's not weakness. That's what it looks like when someone is just trying to cope. But the thing about searching is that it can lead you down paths that feel right emotionally but are untrue factually. And when your emotions start driving the entire journey, it can be easy to ignore what doesn't fit the story you've come to believe. That's why the difference between feeling something deeply and proving it with truth is so important. Emotions are valid, but they are not evidence. They speak to what's going on inside of you, not necessarily what's going on outside. Real healing starts when you begin to challenge the story, not because you're ready to throw it all away, but because you're ready to grow. Growth doesn't come from pretending everything makes sense. It comes from sitting in the discomfort of not knowing and being open to finding out what's real, even if it's not what you hoped. That kind of honesty takes strength. It requires you to let go of comfort and step into uncertainty, but it's the only way to find something solid, something lasting. If you've been searching for someone or something to complete you, it's not because you're broken. It's because you want to feel grounded, you want to feel like you matter, and maybe somewhere along the way, someone made you feel like you didn't. That pain is real, but it doesn't define you. What defines you is what you do with it. Whether you let it close you off or open you up, whether you keep chasing fantasy or finally decide to come home to yourself, coming home to yourself means asking hard questions. It means choosing truth even when it hurts. It means building a foundation not on wishful thinking, but on who you are and who you want to become. And the beautiful part is, you don't need anyone's name or approval or legacy to do that. You don't need to be claimed by someone else to claim yourself. The search can stop when you realize that what you've been looking for might not be out there, it might be waiting for you within. So no, you're not broken. You're someone who's been doing the best they could with the tools they had. But now, it's time to set down the story that no longer serves you. It's time to stop chasing answers that won't come and start listening to the truth that's already inside you. This journey isn't about proving a connection to someone else. It's about finally connecting to yourself, and that's where your real life begins. Clinging to a false story often begins as a form of protection. When life feels unstable or painful, the mind creates narratives that offer comfort and control. Believing in a version of reality that fits our emotional needs can feel safer than facing the unknown or accepting what hurts. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a very human attempt to survive emotional chaos. But over time, what once shielded us starts to weigh us down. The false story that once felt like safety becomes the very thing holding us back from truth and healing. People often don't realize when they're holding on to something untrue. It can feel like conviction or even clarity because it's become so familiar. That story may explain why life has felt unfair or why love has been missing. It may offer the illusion of a special identity or a meaningful connection. But if it isn't grounded in reality, it's like building a house on sand. No matter how much effort you put into decorating it, eventually the foundation gives way. And when it does, it leaves you standing in the ruins of something that was never real to begin with. False beliefs become tangled with who we think we are. That makes them hard to let go of. To abandon the story feels like abandoning a part of yourself. But growth requires the ability to step back and ask hard questions. Is this story serving me? Is it helping me heal? Or is it just keeping me stuck, afraid to face what's really there? These questions are uncomfortable, but necessary. They are the turning point between living in illusion and walking into truth. The longer we hold onto a false story, the more we miss opportunities to build something real. Real relationships, real understanding, real identity. All of these require honesty. They require the ability to say, "This isn't working," or "I might have been wrong." That doesn't mean you've failed. It means you're growing. It means you've reached a point where truth matters more than comfort, where reality is more valuable than fantasy. Letting go of a false narrative isn't the same as giving up. It's an act of courage. It means making room for new ideas, new relationships, and a new sense of self. When you stop clinging to what isn't true, you start to discover who you really are beneath the story. That process can be painful, but it's also powerful. It's where self-respect begins to take root, not because of who you're connected to, but because of how you choose to live your life from this moment forward. It's important to remember that you are not the story you believed. You are not defined by your need to belong to something grand or dramatic. You are defined by your willingness to confront yourself honestly and make changes based on truth. That's where real growth happens. It's slow and often quiet, but it's lasting. It doesn't rely on approval, validation, or fantasy. It relies on you showing up for yourself with honesty and intention. In the end, growth doesn't come from pretending. It comes from letting go. Letting go of the version of the past you hoped was true. Letting go of the comfort that no longer serves you. And most of all, letting go of the belief that you need to be someone else's anything to matter. The false story can feel like home for a while, but it is only in the truth that you begin to build a life that is solid, lasting, and entirely your own. DNA doesn't define worth. That simple truth often gets lost in the noise of identity and the desperate need for belonging. People sometimes believe that who they are is tied to where they come from or whose blood runs in their veins. And while roots matter and connections are powerful, they don't create your value. Your worth isn't something you inherit. It's something you live out through choices, character, and how you show up for yourself and others day after day. There's a deep, very human desire to be claimed, to be chosen, to feel like you come from something meaningful. It's understandable. We all want to feel like we belong somewhere, but your identity is not limited by someone else's name, fame, or absence. You are not lesser because someone didn't show up for you. And you are not more important because someone famous might be connected to you. Your story is already valid, even if it doesn't have the drama or spotlight you once hoped it would. Sometimes people hold onto a fantasy because it gives them a reason to explain what's gone wrong in their lives. The hope that there's someone out there who is supposed to make it all make sense can feel like a lifeline, but tying your worth to someone you've never met, someone who may not even be part of your story, can keep you from recognizing your own strength and value. The truth is, you don't need anyone else's identity to complete your own. The journey to self-worth begins when you stop looking for proof in someone else's DNA and start looking inward. It begins when you accept that your life, your voice, your presence in the world matters because of who you are, not because of who you might be related to. DNA might explain biology, but it does not explain the fullness of a person. It doesn't determine your potential, your resilience, your compassion, or your purpose. Letting go of the idea that your value is tied to someone else's name can be painful, especially if you've spent years believing it. But on the other side of that pain is something freeing. You begin to discover who you are without the illusion. You start to build a life based on truth instead of hope tied to a fantasy. And what you find in that process is often stronger, more grounded, and more powerful than anything a name or bloodline could offer. You are not just someone's child. You are your own person, and your legacy isn't about what you were born into, it's about what you build. Every decision you make, every act of kindness, every time you get back up after falling, you're shaping something that matters. You're writing a story that's worth telling, even if it doesn't start the way you imagined. You're proving, simply by living fully and honestly, that your worth never depended on a connection you hoped for. It was there all along. So if you're wrestling with the question of who you are or where you come from, know this: your value is not up for debate. It isn't tied to a DNA test or a last name. It lives in how you carry yourself, how you treat people, and how you choose to grow. You don't need someone else's story to feel important. You just need to own yours. Because at the end of the day, the most powerful truth you can embrace is that you are already enough.